I have been preaching a series of sermons on the Jesus you never knew. And so this is the third rendition of that sermon, the Jesus you never knew. Because I think we have missed out on this Jesus. You know, we have a whole lot of stuff that we say about Jesus. We grew up in Sunday school, and there's a lot about Jesus that the assumptions that we have made about this Jesus. So I want to dismiss some of those assumptions, and I want to give you a chance to embrace some other assumptions about this Jesus Christ, with the hope that you might be drawn closer to who this Jesus really is. I said that there were three reasons why we were uncovering this series, or we were developing this series. And number one is to find out who Jesus is. Number two, to find out why Jesus came here. What did he do? And thirdly, what did he leave for us to do? This Jesus, what did he leave for us to do? I want to put myself back 2,000 years ago when Jesus was here, and I want to be a traveler with Jesus, and I want to point out to you that if I were there when Jesus was here, I would have noticed some things that nobody else noticed. Because I'm curiously inquisitive. As a child, I was always getting in trouble because I'm curiously inquisitive. I always want to know why the wheel turns. So I was always asking, did you notice? So did you notice? I wonder whether any of you have noticed that Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and Skype all have blue logos. Did you ever notice that? Yeah. Did you ever notice that I get a lot of younger people, Tanisha, who send me emails or texts, and there's this LOL. And at my age, I don't know what that really means. But have you ever noticed that LOL looks like a drowning man with two hands up in the air? Have you ever noticed that a woman's "I'll be ready in 5 minutes" is the same as a man's "I'll be home in 5 minutes"? They're really the same. Those of you from the Caribbean, I don't know if you ever noticed that a flamingo's legs bend backwards in the wrong direction. And that's because what we look at and think it's the knee, it's really the ankle. The ankle is all the way up here on a flamingo. Have you ever noticed that if you change lanes on the highway, that the one you were in always moves faster than the one you are in now? So let's explore the life of Jesus, and let me give you 5 things that I notice about Jesus. The first thing I notice about Jesus is that Jesus grew up in a very hostile environment. Because I always want to disabuse us of the notion that who Jesus was really that little blue-eyed guy in a manger. That Jesus was more than that. That we can't stop at the cradle, but we must see Jesus in this hostile environment in which he came. Because the passage that Marlene read from Isaiah 53 is really a passage about this Jesus who they said was so ugly that the people couldn't look at him. And I'll cover that a little later. There are some who would say, oh, they were talking about Jesus on the cross. Well, no, they were not. So, and I'll talk about that later. But Jesus came into a very hostile environment. In the first place, Mary and Joseph tried to get in the hotel. They tried to get in the inn. and they tried to get into Quality Inn, and they met that hostile environment that there is no room for you here. If God had to send his son here, why would God choose to send his son into such a hostile environment? I just noticed that Jesus came into a very hostile environment. The very fact that of all the young ladies around, why would God impregnate a 15-year-old girl? That created a very hostile environment. Because in that day, what you had is betrothed or engaged and married. Well, Mary and Joseph were engaged to be married, and while they were waiting for the wedding to take place, Mary came home one day and Mary says, I'm pregnant. That created a very hostile environment. Joseph is saying, you have been unfaithful. And she is saying, well, an angel came last night and told me I'm pregnant. Get out of here, Mary. Tell me the truth, Mary. What happened? And here it is, because Joseph never got the initial message. Here it is that Jesus is coming into this world, but this is the reality. The angels told Joseph eventually, but the angels never told the neighbors. Joseph knew that it was the Holy Spirit's baby, but the neighbors didn't know that. All the neighbors knew that as they went around, did you hear what happened? Mary got knocked up, and Joseph says it's his. We know it wasn't Joseph's own. The neighbors, the Holy Spirit never came to the neighbors. The neighbors never knew what happened. That indeed is a hostile environment in which this Jesus had to be born. And that is why later in life, when Jesus began to talk and to preach to the people, they reminded Jesus, we are not the illegitimate child, you are the illegitimate child. That's the hostile environment. And Jesus is trying to preach, and here they are, the other Jewish guys, talking about the fact, we know what happened to your mama. We know what happened. It's a long story, but we know, I hear you preaching, Jesus, but your mother ain't all that. That's a hostile environment in which this Jesus had to try to preach the gospel. And then he goes to Nazareth and he tries to preach in Nazareth, and this is what they are talking in Matthew 15:35. They're saying, isn't this the carpenter's son? This Jesus who is above. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and all his sisters with us? Where did this man get all this? Who does he think he is? A hostile environment is created by the fact that this is what happened. I would have noticed that. I would have been asking God, you could have found a better way. Maybe if you found another way, the people around would have been more responsive to the message of this Jesus. But it's this hostile environment in which this young boy has to grow up, and all his brothers were offended. His brothers and sisters were offended by what Jesus said. Even his brothers, this is what it says, the Bible says, even his brothers did not believe him. Now, what kind of teenager was Jesus? Was Jesus more like Sam as a teenager? Or probably Giovanni as a teenager? Was Jesus an A student? Now, I know y'all want to say he was an A student. I don't think he was an A student, personally. We'll cover that later. Because of my second point. Number 2, Jesus did not take the fast lane. Jesus did not take the fast lane. In other words, this Jesus who grew up with all the pain, with all the curiosities that we grew up with. Jesus did not take the fast lane. He did not jump from the cradle to 30 years old when he started to preach. A lot of stuff happened between that little tender, blue-eyed baby that you saw and when he got to 30. He didn't take the fast lane, but he lived life just as we. And I would have noticed what happened. Our danger is to always think that these 30 years in Jesus' life really didn't matter. As a matter of fact, he was 12 years old when he got a spanking from his mother. I would have noticed that. He was 12 years old when his mother and father were taking one of those pilgrimages. And while they were taking the pilgrimage, this Jesus, 12 years old, I'd have whipped his butt. 12 years old. He wanders off. And for 3 days, my father would have killed me. For 3 days, they couldn't find this Jesus. Thousands of Jews on a pilgrimage, and this little boy just takes off and just goes on his own. I told you, he didn't take the fast lane, but he lived just like you and I. And he got into trouble just like you and I would get. For 3 days, they're looking, they're crying their eyes off. They don't know whether somebody stole him. And here he is, talking with the lawyers and the doctors and asking them questions and not even thinking that your mama looking for you. Where did he sleep that night? Knowing very well that his parents are wandering all over the place looking for him, he's just taking a nap. He didn't take the fast lane. He lived just like we live. And to top it all, when they came to him, when Mary and Joseph finally found this little 12-year-old child, after 3 long days, don't you know we have been looking for you? We have been looking for you all over the place. Where did you go? Who touched you? What did you eat? Look at you. You look thin. You look ravaged. And 12 years old, instead of saying, well, you know, I'm really sorry that I put you all through this, he had the unmitigated gall to look at his parents and says, let me tell you all something. 12 years old, you would have killed DJ. He looks at his parents and says, I'd have knocked all his teeth out. Don't you know? This is his parents. He's telling his parents, don't you know I must be about my father's business? Who your daddy, boy? Who's your daddy? What father are you talking about? This is a tension that Jesus had to live with. I would have noticed the tension that Jesus had to live with, the tension of being a part of this world and also being a part of a world beyond. Here he is, 12 years old, understanding quite well that he is tied to his parents, but knowing quite well that he is also a part of another world. Even to his parents he had to say, don't you know I must be about my father's business. That's why they said that Jesus came with tears and suffering. Number 3. Jesus was a man with no beauty at all. I have seen so many pictures of this Jesus. I was in headquarters and I got in trouble because I had a picture on my wall of what is called the Afrocentric Jesus. That is Jesus with Negroid characteristics. Jesus that looked like us's. And white folks will come into my office and say, why don't you take that down? That's not what Jesus looked like. What did he look like? And that's, they just got offended by that. Because I had a Jesus that looked Negroid. It is only until 1514 that a document, only 1514 was a document forged to say what they thought Jesus looked like. There were no pictures, for the first few centuries, there were no pictures of Jesus anywhere. But what did he look like? And if I were around, I would have a critique of the way Jesus looked. Some people said that he probably had a hunchback. The passage in Isaiah said that he read Isaiah 53 when you get a chance. It talks about this Jesus, hundreds of years before Jesus came. It talked about him that when people saw him, they didn't even want to look at him. He was not this Denzel Washington kind of Jewish guy. Ooh. What did he look like? Some people said he has long hair. Some say he had a mustache. Some said he parted his hair in the middle. Some said he had dreadlocks. Even one commentator said, no man ever saw Jesus laugh. Excuse me? I think Jesus laughed all the time. And I think Jesus laughed all the time because Jesus was always at a party. And those parties lasted for days. The wedding at Cana. Jesus went to the wedding. Jesus didn't go to the wedding to turn water into wine. He went to the wedding to have a good time. And that's what they did at weddings. They went, they had a wedding and everybody laughed. And I think Jesus laughed a lot. I think Jesus laughed at some of the things he saw. I think Jesus had a good sense of humor when he said to one, don't light a candle and put it under a bushel, dummy. I thought Jesus must have said that and started laughing. That's so funny. When Jesus said to the other, look at you looking at the speck in somebody else's eye and you got a plank in yours. Boy, a 2x4 sticking right up. Good sense of humor. I think I would have noticed that Jesus was a happy guy. But I would have noticed that Jesus was also a guy who was so disappointed in human nature. His own friends he would call names. You talk about Trump talking about crooked Hillary and lying Ted. Jesus had names for some people. Even Peter he had a name for. He says, get thee behind me. No, I didn't say that. Did he? Did he really say that? Even to Peter, he would say, get thee behind me, Satan. Not the fast lane, but he grew up. Unlike most of us, I would have noticed that Jesus liked to praise other people. I would have noticed that. Jesus knew that he had the ultimate power to heal, as it came from God. But to many people whom Jesus healed, Jesus just looked at them and says, as they thanked Jesus, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Jesus will say, no, it ain't me. Your faith has made you whole. Boy, he was throwing it right back on them. He made people feel that they feel so good about themselves. And even today, we have the whole, we are so confused about who can heal and how does God heal? Is it your faith or is it God who? He just says, don't worry about it, man. Your faith has healed you. And he was so humble. I would have noticed that he was so humble. With all the people that he healed, most of the people that he healed, he just said, don't tell nobody. He didn't care that the word spread. He just healed people and he says, look, don't tell nobody, man. Just go on. Don't encourage no set of people to be following me all over the place. But I noticed that Jesus was Jamaican. I would have noticed that. I would have noticed that Jesus would always say, when people are saying, we got to get there by so and so time, Jesus would say, don't worry, be happy. I'll get there. I'll get there. Jesus was not constrained by time. As a matter of fact, 2 of his miracles, 2 of the people that he brought back to life, he brought them back to life because he got there late. Lazarus and Jairus' daughter. Because they sent an email to Jesus and told him that Lazarus was sick. Mary and Martha did. But Jesus didn't get there on time. Old sick Lazarus died. But Jesus, being who Jesus is, got there. He got there late. But he was able to exercise that supreme and ultimate power that only Jesus has. Number 4. Number 4 is that I would have noticed in the life of Jesus that there is a mixture of mess and miracles. There's always a mixture of mess and miracles. Because you're going to find yourself in some mess sooner or later. Keep on living. Especially keep on living this Christian life. You're going to find yourself in some mess. But the good word is there is always a miracle in the midst of the mess that you find yourself in. In Mark chapter 5, we find Jesus working a miracle with the woman who he healed from a particular blood disorder. Miracle. What happened after he performed the miracle? What did the Bible say? They laughed at him when he performed that miracle. He continued to heal. He healed 4,000. He fed 4,000. People got angry because he fed 4,000. He fed 4,000 and people start talking about when he going to feed 5,000. Jesus constantly found himself in the messes of life. What, however, we miss. Let me tell you the story of the drunk guy who wandered out and he found a group of Christians and the minister was baptizing people. So the minister finally looked at him and he was all drunk. And the minister looked at him and the minister says, you want to get baptized? And he says, sure, I want to get baptized. Are you ready to find Jesus? And he said, yeah, I'm ready to find Jesus. So the minister took him and ducked him down in the water, held his nose and ducked him down in the water. And when he came up, the minister asked him, did you find Jesus? And he said, no, I didn't find Jesus. So the minister decided, well, I better duck him down a second time and I'll keep him down a little longer this time. So he held his nose and he put him under the water and he really held him down for about 6 seconds. And he brought him up and he said, did you find Jesus? He said, no, I didn't find Jesus. So the minister says, well, I really have to put him down there for a long time. He put him down this time, and he held him down there for about 15 seconds until he started beating up. And this time he got him. And the minister asked him, did you find Jesus? And he said, are you sure this is where he fell in? Jesus was on the shore, and Jesus looked all the way in the middle of the lake, and he saw his friends, he saw his disciples in the middle of a lake. And he saw that they were in trouble in the middle of the lake, and they were dealing with their mess. And Jesus finally decided, all right, they had enough, I'm going to walk over there. And he just walked over and even walked on the water, and he was able to still the storm. Jesus performed a miracle in the midst of their mess. And I just want to encourage you today, whatever mess you're going through, Jesus always brings a miracle in the midst of the mess. And understand sometimes, some of you goody two-shoes, that God even allows a mess to come in the middle of your miracle. The other part is also true. Sometimes you're getting a miracle and it looks like all things are going so good. You're in the miracle. You're in the groove of the miracle, and some mess happens. But trouble don't last always. The last thing I would have noticed is that in his ministry, Jesus is like no other. A special kind of ministry. As a matter of fact, and next week we're going to be talking about why Jesus came. Luke 4:17 through 21. If you get a chance to read that passage of scripture, that's where we'll be preaching next week. But his ministry was like no other, because John the Baptist was getting ready to get his head cut off. He was in prison. And it is in prison, he was not too sure that his cousin was the Messiah. Everybody was saying, well, you know, the Messiah has come. But John was in prison, getting ready to be executed in prison, and he just wanted to know for sure, is you the Messiah or is you not? Excuse my language, my English, my grammar. It just feels better. And John the Baptist sent, look, just give us something to go back to John, because John wants to make sure that before he dies, he knows who you really are. And Jesus says, you go and tell John. You want to know whether I'm the Messiah or not? You want to know, you want something to validate that I'm the Messiah? He says, go and tell John what you have seen around here. Tell him there are people who have sold their C&I dog and taken up bird watching. Go tell him tell John that through my ministry, blind people are beginning to see. Go tell him that. And watch the expression on his face. Go tell John that people have traded in their aluminum walkers and for hiking boots. Go tell John that people are giving up their wheelchairs and they're beginning to walk. Just go tell John that and watch the expression on his face. You want to know whether I'm the Messiah? Go tell John, tell him that the down and out have turned into the up and coming. And a lot of deadbeats are living it up for the first time in their lives. A ministry like nobody else has. He was so unique. You talk about him laughing. Everybody liked a nice story. And Jesus in his ministry was always bringing a story into it. We call it parables. They didn't really happen. Jesus just made them up. Today we call it a lie. But Jesus was always making it up. You know the story of the big fish that we almost caught that got away? Giovanni, we all got that story. That I almost caught that big fish. But Jesus was always making up a story. And Jesus was always like, it's like this. We know it ain't true. But we call it a parable. People like a good story, and Jesus was always willing to give a good story. Finally, I would have noticed what Jesus was about in this sense. That he missed it. I would have noticed that Jesus spent all night praying before he chose his disciples. I would have noticed that Jesus stayed all night praying. Father, help me to pick the right 12. I would have noticed that after spending all night, this is the 2 times that God didn't answer Jesus' prayer. Here and in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he said, Lord, I wish you could take this cup away from me. But he backpedaled, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. But God, I don't want to go to that cross. If it be possible, Lord. And the Lord just said, no, it ain't possible. You go die. And spending all night to choose 12 disciples. And the next day he decides to choose the 12. And you end up with Judas? I could have done better than that. All night, you ask the Father to give you grace and to give you wisdom, and you end up with Judas? And a bunch of nobodies? A bunch of guys who smell like fish? I would have noticed that. But I also will notice that there are 2 reasons why Jesus came. And this is it. That they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach. That's it. Jesus chose 12 men, and I think he chose some women. They just didn't mention it. But he chose these people because he wanted them to be with him. You see, because Jesus was like all of us. He got lonely sometimes. Just like he got hungry. He got lonely sometimes. And he picked them so that they can be with him. And secondly, so that they can go out and preach the message that they heard him preach. I'm glad he came. I don't know about you. I'm glad he came. I wish I were there then. But by virtue of who Jesus is, Jesus gives all of us the opportunity to interrupt his life and to get a rare glimpse of who he really was, so that we might appreciate this Jesus, the Jesus you never knew.